1588, the Nordozen doctor, Johannes Gall, published the first book on regional flora in the world, Silver Hercynia, in which he described the flowers specific to the Harz. In 1668, Rudolf Augustus, Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, granted the first conservation order for Bauman's Cave. The ducal decree stated, inter alia, that the cave should be permanently preserved by all those responsible as a special natural wonder. It also stated that nothing should be spoiled or destroyed, and that groups of ordinary strangers should not be allowed to enter without prior arrangement. A resident mine worker was entrusted to oversee the natural monument. Until the issue of this conservation order, there had only been an order for the protection of the forest, which had been issued by the ruling princes for real, practical considerations. But for the first time the 1668 cave order took ethical aesthetic considerations into account. The year 1668 was the birth of classic nature conservation in Harz. The order had been precipitated by the earlier, serious destruction of the cave's features by vandals. The first Haas Rangers were formed. In 1705, the last bear was killed in the Haas, on the Brocken. The steadily increasing consumption of wood by the pits and smelting works led to overexploitation of forests and, from about 1700, to their outright destruction. There were no less than 30,000 charcoal piles in Harz. In 1707, an order by Count Ernst of Stolberg forbade Brocken guides to take strangers or local folk to the Brocken without special permission, and the lighting of fires was forbidden. The first attempts at forest conservation in the Harz were centered on the Brocken, and began with a far-sighted Nature Conservation Act over 275 years ago. In 1718, Count Christian Ernest of the House of Stolberg issued an ordinance in which destruction or damage to the forest on the Brocken would be severely punished. In 1736, Christian Ernest also built the Wackenhorstchen, Little House in the Clouds, on the Brocken. As a young man, the famous German poet, Goethe visited the Harz several times and had a number of important lifetime experiences. These included his walks on the Brocken and his visit to the mines in Rammelsburg. Later, his observations of the rocks on the Brocken led to his geological research. His first visit to the Harz awakened in him a keen interest in science. See Goethe's Vorrichtung Ditur. In 1777, Goethe climbed the Brocken, departing from Torfhaus. At that time, there was still no mass tourism in the Brocken. In the year 1779 only 421 walkers were recorded. Goethe described his feelings on the summit later, as follows: "So lonely, I say to myself, while looking down at this peak, will it feel to the person, who only wants to open his soul to the oldest, first, deepest feelings of truth." On the 23rd of March, 1798, the last wolf was killed in the Harz near the Plessenberg. The Count's guest house on the Heinrichsche had become too small and suffered from overcrowding. In 1799 it burned down. In 1800, a new guest house was built on the Brocken to replace it. Around 1800, large swathes of the Harz were deforested. The less resistant spruce monoculture, that arose as a consequence of the mining industry in the Upper Harz, was largely destroyed by a bark beetle outbreak and a storm of hurricane proportions in November 1800. This largest known bark beetle infestation in the Harz was known as the Grossfirntropnis, and destroyed about 30,000 hectares, 74,000 acres, of spruce forest and lasted about for 20 years. The woods were largely reforested with spruce. Continuous problems with bark beetle and storms were the negative side effects of mining in the Harz Mountains. In 1818, a mounted forester, Spellerberg, from Lautenthal, killed the last links in the Harz on the Teufelsberg. At the start of the 19th century, the increasing changes to the natural landscape wrought by man and the extinction of large mammals like the bear, wolf and lynx raised awareness of the threat to nature. In 1852, the district administrator of Quedlinburg placed the Teufelsmoor, a rock outcrop famous as an object of folklore and as a rare natural curiosity, near Thal under protection, because the inhabitants of neighboring districts were using the rocks as a quarry. This protection order survived in spite of all protests from the local villages. Thus, a valuable natural monument was saved from destruction, and it is of note that authorities felt that the romantic reasons for its preservation were entirely justified. Albert Peter laid out the Brocken Garden in 1890. This was the first alpine flower garden to be established on German soil. And, in terms of its scientific concept and scope, the Brocken Garden was the first of its type worldwide. The Brocken Railway began service in 1899, against the already strong concerns of conservationists. For example, the botanist, Bly, wanted to prevent trains from climbing the Brocken, because he felt it would threaten the Brocken's flora. In 1907, Hermann Lorenz uttered his famous cry more protection for the Brocken, mehr Schutz für den Brocken, in light of the mass tourism that was beginning to affect the Brocken. By 1912, he effectively pressed for the establishment of a Harz National Park, without calling it such, in der Harzer Heimatspark, Verleger Pelhams U Company, Braunschweig 1912, a brochure that has remained relatively unknown. The Harz played a special role in the life of the famous regional poet, naturalist and local patriot, undoubtedly not least because his second wife, Lisa Hausmann, came from Barbis in the South Harz. Around 1920, the Capercaillie population in the Harz died out. The Wernige rector, W. Voigt, wrote, in 1926, in his famous Brockenbuch, in America it has long become the business of the people, to create a sacrosanct haven for the native flora and fauna of their regions in national parks. North and South Germany have their heath and alpine parks. May the joint efforts of the royal authorities, the local police, the Wernige Road Nature Conservation Society and individual friends of the Brocken also succeed now in central Germany, through caring nurture across the board, in establishing and preserving the Brocken too, as a small, but unique, nature reserve for the German people. In the 1930s, national park planning in Germany became specific again. There were concrete plans for the national parks of the Lumberg Heath, Bavarian Bohemian Forest, Heitoen, Hollingsberg Musiklasse and Kuristschnerau. The Second World War prevented these national park plans from being taken forward. Nevertheless, in 1937, an Upper Harz Nature Reserve, Naturschutzgebiet Oberharz, was designated. Nazi Germany and Second World War. During the Nazi era, the Harz area became an important production site for the armaments industry. Many factories, important to the war effort, were located there and, as the war neared its conclusion, they were increasingly staffed with slave labor. As a result, the Harz was the location of several hundred forced labor camps and KZs at that time. KZ Dora near Nordhausen in the South Harz became particularly famous. This camp, Mittelbau Dora, also Dora Mittelbau and Nordhausen Dora, was a sub-camp of Buchenwald concentration camp. Its prisoners were used by the SS mainly in the tunnel excavation and nearby underground stations of the Mittelwerk Limited, in Constein, situated near Nordhausen, where the V-2 rocket and the flying bomb V-1 rocket were produced. The slave laborers at the Dora camp were subjected to brutal conditions, which led to more than 20,000 deaths. In the last weeks of the war, the so-called Haas Fortress, Hafestung, is worth mentioning. In February/March 1945, the SS Reichsführer, Heinrich Himmler, established the Haas Fortress to defend central Germany from the Western Allies. Its headquarters was at Blankenburg. Amongst the formations mobilized were divisions belonging to the 11th Army, divisions of the Waffen-SS and the Volkssturm. When the United States First Army reached Nordhausen in the southern Harz, and went to advance northwards, it met with resistance, especially in the hills around the towns of Ilfeld and Elbridge. Not until 7 May 1945 did the last formations of the 11th Army and Waffen-SS in the Harz surrender. Several units of Volkssturm troops fought on against the Americans during May. Shortly before his death in 2003, American Second World War veteran and organized crime figure, Frank Sheeran, admitted to having participated in a massacre of German POWs in the Harz area. At the time, Sheeran was serving in the 45th U.S. Infantry Division. According to Sheeran, his unit was climbing the Harz when they came upon a mule train carrying supplies to German positions on the hillside. The Americans handed shovels to their prisoners, forced them to dig their own graves, then shot and buried him. 3. Wernher von Braun, one of the leading figures in the development of rocket technology in Germany during the Second World War and, subsequently, in the United States, reportedly ordered blueprints of his work to be hidden in an abandoned mine shaft in the Harz Range. 4. Former inner German border. Until 1990, the inner German border ran through the western third of the Harz. The Brocken Plateau and of the peaks near the border were part of a large military out-of-bounds area, which demonstrating walkers first entered on the 3rd of December, 1989. Tourism on the Brocken has since then become very intense. About 1.3 million people visit the summit of the Brocken annually. The former out-of-bounds area today has many habitats worth protecting and, as a result, it is being turned into a green belt. Economy. Mining archive in Klaus-Thal-Zellerfeld. Historic mining industry. The mining industry in the Harz has its origins about 3,000 years ago during the Bronze Age. The 7 upper Harz mining towns Klaus-Thal, Zellerfeld, Bad Grund, St. Andresburg, Lautenthal-Altenau and Wildermann and around 30 other villages within and on the edge of the Harz can thank the upper Harz mining and smelting industries for their boom. The former imperial town of Goslar, too, whose splendor depended on the ore treasures of the Rammelsburg, mined argentifers lead ore for centuries. Mining heavily dominated the economic life of the Harz as well as its stationary. Miners created the famous engineering system for the management of water in the Upper Harz, the Upper Harz Water Regale, of which 70 kilometers of ditch and 68 ponds, with a volume of 8 million cubic meters, are still used today. Without using their considerable hydropower output, silver mining in the Harz would never have been able to attain its major economic significance. In the eastern Harz Forland, Mansfeld land and Sangerhauserwald, copper schist was mined until 1990. The early beginnings of this industry were first mentioned in 1199, and it was considered in its heyday, at the end of the 15th century, as the most important in Europe. In addition, at Ilfeld is the only stone coal mine in the Harz, the former Rubenstein Gallery mine, Bergwerk Rubensteinerstellen. In the North Thuringian mining area, there were numerous potash mines and, in the vicinity of Roblingen, geological waxes were extracted by a mining concern. The last mine in the Upper Harz, the Wackenhügel pit in Bad Lauterberg, closed its operations in June 2007 for economic reasons. Having formerly had 1,000 workers, the mine employed just 14 people towards the end, using the most modern technology to extract barite. With the closure of this facility, mining operations that had begun in the Middle Ages and had continued unbroken since the 16th century extracting silver, lead and zinc, came to an end. Bearing witness to the industry are cultural monuments as well as the negative consequences of mining for the environment, such as e.g. pollution of the ecosystem with heavy metals. 5. Economy today. The booming mining industry of bygone centuries in the Harz region, especially for silver, iron, copper, lead and zinc, has declined markedly. However, the heavy metal residues in the soils of the upper Harz, which in some cases are significant, represent a serious environmental hazard today. Copper workings are still important today in the area of Mansfeld. The last centers of mining were the Rammelsberg near Goslar, closed 1988, and the Hilfgotts pit near Bad Grund, closed 1992. In Bad Lauterberg, Barrett used today primarily for the manufacture of paint and in sound insulation, was extracted until July 2007 at the Wackenhugel pit, the last mine in the entire Harz. Furthermore, limestone is still mined at Elbingrode in 3 large open pits, Werk Rubyland, Werk Kaltestal and Werk Hornberg. Another important employer is the Clausthal University of Technology. In addition to the classical disciplines of mining and metallurgy, many engineering and science subjects, as well as business studies courses, are taught and researched. The extensive woods of the Harz mean that forestry plays an important economic role, as do the associated woodworking industries. In the first millennium AD, hardwood trees, mainly common beech, were predominant on the higher ground typical of a natural highland forest. Hence one spoke of going in die Harten, into the hardwood forest, a term which gave the Harz its name. Today, however, the commercially managed areas are mainly monocultures of Norway spruce. A cause of this development was mining history in the Harz region, with its high demand for wood and the consequent overuse and devastation of the stands of forest. In addition, there were the climatic changes of the so-called Little Ice Age. The reforestation with relatively easily managed and undemanding spruce trees since the middle of 18th century was mainly due to the proposals of the senior forester and master hunter, Johan Jorg van Langen. Tourism. Tourism is very important to the Harz, although the prevalence of cheap air travel has led to a decline in recent years. There are many spa towns, and almost every village in the Harz and Haas Fortress caters to tourists. Well-known destinations are the Harz National Park and the Brocken, as well as the historic Tones on the edge of the Harz. Concepts like the Western Town, Gorman City Harz, or the rock operas on the Brocken are intended to also be particularly attractive to foreign tourists. The Harzer Verkennisverband, HVV, is responsible for the marketing of the Harz to tourists. Winter sports. View of the upper Harz. Although winter sport in the Harz does not have the significance over the mountain areas, such as the Thuringian Forest, or mountains, Black Forest or even the Alps, there are plenty of winter sport facilities. Of particular note are the villages and towns of Altenau, including Torfhorst, Benekinstein, Braunlage, including Hohegage, Goslar Haninkai, Hasselfeld, St. Andresberg, including Sonnenberg and Oderbruck, and Stjerk. Due to the high altitude and length of their runs, Nordic skiing is very popular. International winter sport competitions take place on Thvernberg ski jump near Braunlage and the biathlon facility at Sonnenberg. Also worth mentioning are the many cross-country skiing runs, Loipen, in the Harz. Their quality and features are ensured by the landowners, particularly in the Harz National Park, where snow is still relatively guaranteed during the winter months, and also by individual communities and societies. Fordervrin Loipenverband Harz, for example, is well known in this regard. It was founded in 1996 on the initiative of the Harz National Park, Harz Winter Sport Parishes, the cable car and lift operators, hotel sound transport companies, and has the aim of promoting ski tourism in the Harz and looking after the interests of nature conservation. The Mountain Rescue Service on the cross-country routes, the toboggan slopes, footpaths, alpine ski pistes and rough terrain is provided by the Bergwatt Haas. Summer sports. The Oka with white water. A footpath is on the right bank. Former